Now, a mammoth new poll of 18,000 people predicts that Keir Starmer's Labour Party will win the next election with a majority of 154 seats, almost double what Boris Johnson achieved in 2019. It forecasts that Labour will have over 400 seats, including becoming the largest party in Scotland. And it's predicted that some major Conservative politicians will lose their own seats. That's including Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and former party leader Iain Duncan Smith. Now, of course, this is just a poll, and they are often proven to be wrong. But Esther, if this poll is anywhere close to being correct, is this good news for Britain?
Well, it depends on what they do with it. I think if, on the Scotland point, if they do win a majority in Scotland, I do think that it would be a wise idea to have a commission on devolution, because devolution turns 25 this year, and we don't have a habit of actually reviewing policies in this country. So I do think that it would be a good thing to have a check on the power of Scottish nationalist politicians that basically ram through often legislation that conflicts with existing legislation, annoys a lot of people in Whitehall and all of that. I do think, though, it's hard for them to be worse than the Tories, because the Tories have been in power for 14 years, and from what we can tell, from the murmurings we can tell from Labour, I don't see how they can be much worse. There are things that I would like for them to say that they would like to do, like on defence, you know. They've said they want to commit to NATO spending, which is fine, but they haven't actually talked about increasing recruitment in the army, for instance, or increasing defence spending in general. So, you know, that's something that I would like. But the Tories haven't done that. The Tories have basically slashed defence spending since the 80s, halved it since the 80s. So they can't be worse. They've committed to more house building. That could only be a good thing. But again, how are you going to fund it? On the NHS, they're making noise about, you know, opening up more appointments. You see, again, it's kind of following the same line and putting sticky tape on like an open wound, right? We should be talking about how are we going to improve patient care and clinical outcomes, whether that's through the NHS or through some sort of, you know, social insurance like they have in basically every other country in the developed world, instead of saying, oh, we want to be like the US, which we don't. I think that would be a good thing. So ultimately, it depends on what they do with it.
OK, but it doesn't sound like you're too confident that they're going to do the best for the country with it. What about just in terms of that level of a majority? Normally, a party wouldn't win that, and so any sort of policy they wanted to get through would have some sort of check and balance, and they'd have a little bit of resistance. But when you've got 400 seats, you could just walk through anything you wanted. Is that OK for a party to be able to do that?
So I made a lot of people on the sort of, I would say, the harder left angry in the Corbyn years, because I couldn't bring myself to vote Labour under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I certainly didn't vote for the Conservatives either. I will now happily vote for a Labour government. I think we will get a Labour government. But I would be a little bit sceptical about this poll. Yes, it is a survey of 18,000 people, and I think most polls tend to be 2,000. And yes, earlier in the week, we also had another survey of 15,000 people, which was even worse news for the Conservatives. I think this survey has them on about 150 odd seats. Earlier in the week, it was as few as 98. Now, two things on that. First of all, I don't think it will happen like that. Yeah. I think the reform vote may well start to melt away as we get closer to the election, or at least on election day. It will focus minds. And secondly, if it were to happen like this, I do think it wouldn't be very good for British democracy. And I say that as someone on the left. And the reason I say it is because we need to have the government held robustly to account, whether that's a Tory government or a Labour government. The press don't always do the best job of it. I think we've got a rather right-leaning written press in this country, to say the least. We need to make sure if Labour do get into power, it's not just the newspapers, it's not just the broadcasters, but it is also a parliamentary opposition that is scrutinising government policy. And if the Tories were to be reduced to something as apocalyptic as 98 seats or even 150, I don't think that would be good for democracy.
By the way, I don't think this is going to happen either. I don't think they're going to have a huge majority of 400 seats. I think usually polling is most accurate 2 weeks before an election. That's when most people sit up. The polls will narrow. I think on the point of reform, even if they get 8 to 10 seats, that's actually quite a huge win for them. And I do think that Keir Starmer is keeping his cards close to his chest at the moment because he doesn't want, as he said, for the Tories to nick...
He doesn't have to do anything.
Well, no, but he's also said that he doesn't want the Tories to nick some of his initiatives.
Which they have done.
Which they have done. But I think that's not because he's very creative. It's because there's not a lot of room for creative, ideologically driven policy. I think we're in damage control. I don't think it would be good for Britain, but I don't see how they can do a much worse job than the Tories have done.
I mean, both of you said you don't think this is going to happen, and you're right. We're a long way from an election. Lots of things can would change, but it was 18,000 people, which is huge for a poll. We're going to go to the callers now and speak to Douglas from South Lanarkshire. Do you think that a huge Labour majority, a Labour landslide like this would be good for Britain?
Well, it's Douglas from Lanarkshire. I do hope, actually, they can run what I could only call the capitalist system for the benefit of the people of Britain than the Tories have.
Yeah.
And that majority, I don't know about huge majority, but there's a real need for a change.
Well, yes, but is Labour the change that we need? I mean, the other argument is that actually they're not winning this landslide because they're a fabulous party with fabulous policies and everybody has full confidence in them. There's an argument to be made that they're only winning this sort of landslide because people have lost faith in the Conservative Party quite drastically and the SNP as well.
Well, as I say, it's ideological. It's running the system, the capitalist system, for the benefit of the people of Britain. And it seems to be the case, unbelievably but true, that the Conservatives don't seem to be able or capable to run the system.
But you have faith that Keir Starmer could run a party that does?
Well, it's maybe more than hope than expectation. But we've got to hope and have an expectation of something ideologically.
But what about the level of a landslide? I mean, we need checks and balances. That's why we've got the House of Lords. Maybe you think that's enough. We don't actually need a party to robustly check any policies that Labour might want to throw through.
Well, it doesn't seem to be based upon a large majority. You've only got to look at the majority the Conservatives were given at the last election to get us into the situation we're in now.
Yeah, but this could be double that, so we could be doubly in trouble in 10 years' time.
Or it could be more democratic if the people were listened to. Maybe not with the massive majority getting fired about. Only time will tell in that. But what I'm looking for is an answer. Is there an alternative to the way we're going? And
you think Labour is the alternative?
Well, as far as I'm personally concerned,
yeah.
At this stage, and the way things are, they seem to be the only alternative.
Douglas, thank you very much for your call. Nick from Devon, do you have an alternative to Labour? Is there any other choice?
Oh, hiya, Strom and panel. Well, no, not under our present system. I don't think I have. I mean, I don't think that it's very good at all that, we have an opposition that's basically weak. And I'm afraid, this is probably what's going to happen in the next general election. I mean, the first past the post system really is a silly system, and hopefully one day the general public will understand it. It's only us and Belarus that actually sort of operate a system. And
so you would change the system then in order to make it fairer?
Oh, yes, because you see, the thing is, all that's going to happen, it seems to be, is that, we're going to get Labour government for the next 2 terms and it will flip over again to the Tories. And
that seems to be the way it goes.
And that, which is completely crazy, because at the end of the day, the majority of the people in the country, to my mind, aren't properly represented.
In the next election, if we did change the electoral system to whichever system you think would be more appropriate, Nick, what do you think the outcome would be? Do you think that Labour may not win?
I would think that, you'd probably end up getting a Labour minority government, but with other parties actually sort of feeding in the coalition, as what happens in many other sort of proper democracies in Europe and elsewhere.
I think the point on representation is very important, because I wouldn't be surprised if more people actually choose not to vote than do vote in the next election. Apathy is going to be at an all-time high. But there is something to be said about the stability that a first-past-the-post system brings. So yes, representation is a big issue, but you have countries like Belgium that would be without a functioning government for literally a year, because they have all these sort of coalition parties in one sort of muddled, as one kind of muddled government. And yes, you can argue that it's still hard to get legislation through here, but it's a lot easier than in countries that do have proportional representation. I think the bigger issue is tackling voter apathy. How can you make people feel like their vote matters and that they don't have to, as George Galloway would phrase it, to settle for 2 cheeks of the same bum? They actually have options. Well,
if you change the system, then maybe people would go to the polls because they would feel that their vote was going to be more representative. The counter-argument to that, though, Nick, is that it's very hard to get things done when you have a minority government.
Well, you could say that, but look what we got at the moment. We got a ridiculous situation where, quite honestly, we got a government in power that very, very few people at the moment really want. I mean,
Well, they wanted it at one point, but it was maybe buyer's regret.
You can get what you want, but if that actually will translate into policy changes is completely dubious, in my opinion. I think most people have to settle for the less bad option.
Yeah, but the thing is, only I think it was 44% of the people in the country actually voted for it last time. So that means 56% of the percentage of the people didn't. So we're not really being sort of represented properly. We won't be until we get a proportional system.
I mean, I understand where Nick is coming from, because we are likely or could be in a position where under 50% of the population actually vote for Labour, maybe 45%. And yet, if these polls are to be believed, they could end up with almost 2/3 of the seats in Parliament and pretty much able to do what they want. And the alternative viewpoint is that if people are really, really passionate about reform or about Green, the Green Party is just two examples, then it's open for all of us to vote for those parties.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is still democratic. If people if enough people want reform or Green, they can vote for them.
Nick, thank you very much for your call. Janice from Essex, bringing it back to Labour, a Labour landslide, would that be beneficial?
No, I think it'd be absolutely horrific, because Starmer has Ed Miliband in one ear, Tony Blair in the other. He's still got Corbynistas. We have no idea what his manifesto is, except for the fact that he would let in more migration. He is going absolutely mad for Green. Now, I don't know if you've seen anything, the destruction, getting lithium and cobalt out of the ground. I mean, you're going to have swathes of country where nothing grows there. Sorry?
Are you talking about for batteries for electric cars and things?
Yeah, it takes 10 kilos for one lithium battery in a car.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think electric cars have been the silver bullet for the environment that we all thought it might have been. And certainly when you look abroad to where all the components of electric cars come from, it's devastation, as you say. It's not good. But we have to do something about the climate crisis, don't we, Janice? And at least the Labour Party are coming up with some sort of policy for it. And they have been open. They want to bring back their own sort of, they want to create their own sort of green company. So we have a bit of energy independence. That's something, isn't it?
I think this is putting the cart before the horse. We do not have the infrastructure to go at the speed we're going.
Or the technology.
Now, technology. Until someone comes up with a better idea than heat pumps, wind farms that don't blow, solar panels, electric cars. How are you going to put a battery on the back of a lorry?
But isn't that what all the other parties are saying as well, Janice?
Well, I think it's because they're not being honest. They're not being honest about the fact that unless we're willing to downgrade our lifestyles significantly, we need to come up with an alternative to the current fossil fuels, which is 80% of our energy use that we currently use, that are cheaper, more plentiful and more reliable. And the reality is we don't have that. Now, if they want to create a sovereign fund to invest in the research for that technology, that does make it cheaper and more reliable and more plentiful, so that other countries would use it as well and make that transition, which is to their benefit. That's fine, but they're not being honest and saying that's what we need. They're just saying, oh, let's encourage more electric vehicles, even though we literally have 15% of the infrastructure needed to make them commercially viable.
And I believe actually people buying electric vehicles is now going down. I think I heard on the radio this morning. Companies buying them are going up. Janice, thank you very much for your call. We've got lots of messages coming in on this. So we're asking whether a Labour landslide for the next general election would be a good thing for Britain. Richie on Twitter says, we've had 14 years of disaster as well as a worrying move towards far-right politics. We need a good decade of proper socialism to readdress the balance just to get us back onto some sort of centrist level. Do you think that's fair, Esther?
That's very ambitious. I don't know if socialism is the answer. I think it's more, we just need blunter conversations. I think one of the things that I've noticed is the politicians that govern this country are completely adrift from the rest of the country. And I don't know whether it's arrogance or just sheer ignorance or just unwillingness to engage with the electorate. But if you have sort of someone who works on a pig farm in Staffordshire and they talk to the average MP, there's just a complete gap.
Disconnect.
Exactly. That's the bigger issue.
One of my worries, by the way, is, and this has been articulated by the likes of Andrew Marr and Sir Vince Cable, is if, or as they might say, when Keir Starmer fails to deliver proper change after the first couple of years of his premiership, assuming Labour gets in, as I think most of us think they will, then what happens? Then you either get even more apathy than perhaps there is at the moment.
No, you'll get anger.
You also get a lurch to the far right if there's anger. And so there is so much to play for in those first couple of years.
OK, that's interesting. Mark on Facebook says, I'm not a Labour voter, but obviously they are going to win. There is nothing worse than a weak government or hung parliament. So if they're going to have a Labour government, we may as well have a strong one. That's interesting. Do you agree with that then? You don't.
Strong on...
I'm concerned, as I've said, I'm concerned if Labour were to get too big a majority. And what's particularly interesting about this, if these polls are to be believed, and because of recent elections, UK-wide elections, we have to dose them with a huge pinch of salt. But I suppose the concern here is that we may end up with a dominant Labour government, even though there isn't, I don't think, a massive desire in this country for either Starmer or Labour. Yes, Starmer has done really good work in detoxifying the Labour Party, dragging it towards electability, moving it away from Corbynism, but there isn't a massive enthusiasm